Most people scroll past abandoned buildings without a second thought. Broken windows, rotting wood, a problem that belongs to someone else. But one day in October 2024, a young wellness creator from rural Virginia pulled up to a crumbling 1907 general store, a building that had been sitting completely untouched for decades, and she didn't see a problem at all. She saw everything she'd been dreaming about her entire adult life. What happened next didn't just change her channel, it changed who she was, what she stood for, and what the internet decided it couldn't stop watching. This is the story of Emma Shaye, better known online as Holistic Emma, and the 110-year-old abandoned building that turned her world upside down. Before any of this, before the dust and the floor joists and the discoveries nobody was prepared for, Emma Shaye had built something real online. Her handle, Holistic Emma, said everything you needed to know. Her world was wellness, mindfulness, holistic living, the kind of content that felt personal and grounded. Morning yoga, Palo Santo burning on a quiet desk, conversations about slowing down and tuning in. On Instagram, she'd started out in hippie fashion and beauty before the account evolved into something deeper. The whole identity she'd built was rooted in inner peace, balance, the idea that how you live your daily life matters. Her YouTube channel had been around for years. She'd created it back in 2008, posted her first actual video in 2018, and had been quietly growing ever since. Lifestyle vlogs, travel content, wellness conversations, nothing explosive, just a creator who showed up consistently and built a community that trusted her. By October 2024, her YouTube channel sat at around 1,500 subscribers, a small but loyal audience, the kind of following that takes years to build carefully. And then she made a decision that nobody in that community could have predicted. The Row store had been a fixture in rural Southampton County, Virginia for well over a century. Built in the early 1900s, it served the community as both a general store and a post office, one of those places that once was the heartbeat of an entire town. When the traffic through a place like that dries up, it doesn't disappear quickly. It just slowly stops, and then one day you realize nobody has touched the door in decades. By the time Emma found it, the building had been sitting frozen in time for years. A massive 4,000 square foot brick structure on 1 acre of land, shelves still holding the dust and papers and relics of a life that had simply been left behind, the kind of building that most people walk past, glance at, and decide isn't their problem. Emma bought it in October 2024. Her plan wasn't to flip it. It wasn't to turn it into a boutique hotel or a trendy coffee shop. She wanted to convert the entire building into a working homestead, a flower farm, an herbal farm, a place to actually live. The name Row came from the last name of the first owner, and she made it clear from the beginning that she wasn't going to erase that. She called it Heritage Row, a choice that said everything about how seriously she was taking the responsibility of what she'd walked into. But buying it was the easy part. And what came next was anything but. Walking into a building that's been sealed up for decades is something most people never experience. You're not just walking into a room, you're walking into a time capsule. Every surface, every shelf, every corner holds something that hasn't been touched since a completely different era. And that's exactly what Emma found. The building had been a post office as well as a general store, which meant what was left inside wasn't just old stock, it was correspondence, documents, personal artifacts, antique glass bottles from the early 1900s, including old ammonia aromatic bottles that still had their original labels, postal ephemera that nobody had looked at since the store was still running, pieces of a community's daily life, preserved in dust and time. She shared every single discovery, every strange find, every room she cautiously cleared, every moment she genuinely didn't know what she was looking at. The audience grew with each video because the discoveries felt completely unscripted, because they were. There was no prop department, there was no set designer. It was just a woman, a camera, and a building full of secrets. And then came the moment that made everyone genuinely hold their breath. One episode showed Emma taking on work that most people would wait for a professional crew to handle, moving massive antique safes, installing floor joists largely on her own, pushing a structurally compromised 4,000 square foot brick building towards something livable with very little help. In one episode, she came close enough to a serious injury that an ER visit was almost the outcome. She was transparent about it, because she was transparent about everything, and that honesty was exactly what kept people coming back. Emma posted her first renovation video on November 25, 2024. At that point, her channel had around 1,500 subscribers. Enough to feel the love from a small community, but nothing that suggested what was coming. By December 24, 2024, Less than a month later, that number had jumped to 8,300. By mid-January 2025, it was sitting at 19,600. On TikTok, under the handle she'd had for years, her following hit 49,100 in the same window. Instagram, which she'd been building since her fashion and beauty days, began growing by thousands of followers almost weekly. Eventually, a single video crossed 1 million views. Then the channel's total view count climbed past 21 million. Instagram settled at 115,000 followers. TikTok landed near 97,500. Numbers that represented a completely different scale of audience than anything she'd been working with before. All driven by footage of one woman, inside a building most people would condemn, doing physically demanding work that didn't look glamorous for even a single frame. The obvious question is why? Why did this resonate so deeply? There's no shortage of renovation content on the internet. There's no shortage of female creators doing homestead-style projects. But something about what Emma was doing was cutting through in a way that nothing else was. Part of it was the building itself, a 4,000 square foot historic general store that was also a post office. That's not a regular renovation, that's a rescue mission. Viewers weren't just watching someone update a kitchen, they were watching someone try to save a piece of American history from disappearing entirely. But the other part, the part that the numbers don't fully explain, was Emma herself. She had spent years building a reputation for being genuine. Her wellness content wasn't performative. Her mindfulness wasn't a brand persona. So when she showed up inside a crumbling building, clearly exhausted, clearly uncertain, clearly learning things on the fly, people believed her. Because she had always been the kind of creator who showed the full picture. And the full picture was about to get a lot more complicated. Here's where the story shifts into something more interesting than a simple viral moment. Emma had built her entire online identity around balance, around taking care of yourself, around slowing down and being present. Holistic Emma wasn't just a handle, it was a philosophy. And then she walked into a project that demanded the absolute opposite of everything she stood for. She wrote about it openly. Before she bought the store, yoga was a non-negotiable morning ritual. After she bought it, she was stretching for 3 minutes and then running out the door. Palo Santo, something she'd burned constantly, almost as a daily anchor, sat untouched for months. Meditation, which had been a regular practice, dropped to maybe once a month. The wellness creator who made her living telling people to prioritize inner stillness had, by her own admission, abandoned every single one of those practices. She described herself honestly as someone with an all-or-nothing spirit, a quality that had pushed her further than most people would go, but that had also burned her out more times than she wanted to count. The store had become everything, and she knew it. What made this land differently than a typical creator confession was the context. This wasn't someone saying they'd been slacking on self-care. This was someone whose entire public identity had been built around self-care, admitting that they'd left it completely behind in pursuit of a building. The irony was impossible to miss, and Emma didn't try to hide it. Then came the moment that quietly stirred something in the community. Her dad, who had become a familiar presence to viewers, often helping with the heavy work, took down the original general store sign while Emma was away picking up equipment. She drove 2 hours for a brush cutter. By the time she got back, the sign was gone. She stood at the front of the building and described what it felt like to see the front bare for the first time, this quiet, surreal confirmation that the building had crossed a threshold. It was no longer a store. Whatever it was going to become next had officially begun. She acknowledged the weight of that moment honestly. She knew some locals might feel the loss. The sign had been there for a long time. It carried memories that didn't belong to her. But her position was clear. The building had sat untouched for decades. Nobody else had stepped in. She had. And whatever mixed feelings that created in the community, among locals, among viewers, she wasn't going to pretend they didn't exist. She just wasn't going to let them stop her either. One of the things that separated Emma's project from other renovation series was what she did with what she found. Most creators in this space treat discovered artifacts as content. A cool find gets filmed, gets reactions, and then disappears into storage or gets sold quietly off-screen. Emma built an entirely different model. She launched a shop called Heritage Row, named deliberately to honor the original owner whose last name had been attached to the building for over a century. The shop sold the physical pieces of the building's past: antique bottles, 100-year-old documents, postal ephemera from the old post office, objects that had been sitting inside those walls since the early 1900s. She sold mystery bags of postal ephemera, random collections of authentic pieces from the general store and post office, each one different, each one carrying its own fragment of history. Buyers were getting a literal piece of the Row store's past, old paper, notes, forgotten relics from a time that most people will never hold in their hands. And every dollar went back into the renovation. It was a model that made complete sense and that viewers responded to immediately. The building was funding its own restoration. The history inside it was being passed into the hands of people who would care for it. And the story of the building was being kept alive through the people who owned a piece of it, not just through a YouTube channel, but in homes across the country. She also wrote about future ambitions for the shop, not just selling what was found, but potentially creating replicas of the items she was keeping. Bottles, frames, rugs, the kind of objects that carried the aesthetic and spirit of the building forward into something that could exist at a wider scale. Whether that materialized or not was still an open question, but the thinking behind it showed the kind of long-term intentionality that went beyond content creation. By the time autumn 2025 arrived, Emma was describing the renovation as having shifted from discovery to rebuilding. The early episodes had been about clearing and uncovering, finding what was there, understanding what she'd actually bought. That phase had a particular kind of energy that was hard to replicate. The mystery, the discoveries, the constant sense that any room might contain something nobody had seen in 100 years. The second phase was harder. Floor joists, ceilings, structural decisions, the kind of slow, unglamorous work that doesn't look exciting on camera but that determines whether the whole thing holds together. She'd swept up lath and plaster from upstairs bedroom floors. She'd made decisions about where to put temporary living arrangements, a small rustic kitchen tucked into a corner of the guest room, a lounge space for herself and whoever was helping that week. She'd been dreaming about putting a yurt somewhere on the acre of land, a round canvas structure set back from the building, somewhere to write and rest while the main renovation ground on. She'd also written something that stopped a lot of her community cold. A Substack post in July 2025 titled A Reflection on the Homestead, and in it she mentioned wishing her mom was there to see it. She described the project as the kind of thing her mom would have loved. Her mom had apparently told the kids when they were young to find the dollar homes in Italy and renovate them. That detail hit differently for a lot of people. There was a grief underneath this project that most viewers hadn't fully registered until that moment. By the end of 2025, her Substack posts were carrying titles like Fall at the Homestead, Year 1 Comes to a Close, and Winter Settles in at the Homestead. She was marking time, acknowledging what 1 year of this had actually cost, and given her in equal measure, the channel continued posting. The shop continued selling. The project continued. And in early 2026, she posted what the TikTok algorithm pushed to hundreds of thousands of people, a video called My Abandoned General Store Renovation. A year later, a single video looking back at everything from October 2024 onward. It did 77,000 views and counting. Pull back from the numbers for a second. Pull back from the viral moments and the follower counts and the subscriber jumps, and look at what Emma Shaye actually did. She was a wellness creator with 1,500 YouTube subscribers who made a decision that most people with far more resources, far more experience, far more support, would never have made. She bought a condemned building in rural Virginia that had been sitting untouched for decades. She walked in without a production team, without a renovation budget from a network, without a contractor on standby. She picked up a camera, started filming, and figured out the rest as she went. The building she chose wasn't incidental. It had been a post office, a general store, a community hub, a place where people had gathered, mailed letters, bought supplies, and lived out the ordinary moments that eventually become history. When Emma walked in, she wasn't just buying property. She was taking on the responsibility of something that had been part of a community's identity for over 100 years. The fact that she felt that weight and said so publicly, explicitly, more than once, is what separated her from every other renovation creator who found an old building and made content inside it. And the tension that ran underneath all of it, the wellness creator who stopped practicing wellness, the holistic influencer who abandoned her routines in pursuit of something that looked nothing like her brand, that was the story that the numbers couldn't fully contain. Because it wasn't a pivot strategy, it wasn't a calculated rebrand, it was someone who genuinely changed, who encountered something bigger than the identity they'd built online and decided to walk toward it anyway, even without knowing where it led. The question the comments kept asking, can she actually finish this, was never really about the renovation. It was about whether someone could sustain that level of commitment to something this difficult, this lonely, this unrelenting for long enough to see it through. Whether the person who drove down a Virginia back road one day in October 2024 looked at a building the whole world had given up on and decided it was worth saving, whether that person would still be standing at the end of it. Based on everything she shared, the answer appears to be yes. The building is still standing. So is she. As of early 2026, Heritage Row is a brand, a shop, a renovation series, a Substack newsletter, and a homestead in progress. Emma is more than 44 documented episodes into the journey with no sign of stopping. The flower farm and herbal garden she envisioned when she bought the property are still part of the plan. The building that the community of Southampton County had watched sit empty for decades is now watched weekly by hundreds of thousands of people across the world. The Daffodil Post, her Substack newsletter, remains the most intimate window into the project. It's where she writes between videos, where she works through the harder moments, where she tells the story that doesn't always fit into a 20-minute edit, and where she sells the artifacts, sends them to people who want to hold a piece of history in their hands, and keeps the funding flowing back into the walls and the floors and the future of Heritage Row. She wishes her mom was there to see it. Her dad is still showing up to help. The original Row sign is gone from the front of the building now, but the name lives on in everything she's built around it. The wellness creator who bought a 110-year-old abandoned building isn't exactly holistic Emma anymore. She's something more complicated than that, something that can't be summed up in a handle or a content niche. She's a woman in the middle of something she can't entirely predict, building something she can't entirely plan, in a building that's been waiting longer than she's been alive for someone to care enough to try. That's why the internet can't look away. And if you're wondering whether she's going to make it, tune in, because that story isn't finished yet.